All Reaper elements, hold in place. Nobody moves. The voice came out of the command truck's speaker at 0700 exactly, and it landed on 19 trucks, the way weather lands on a field. Engines kept idling because shutting down on a hostile route is its own decision, and nobody was making decisions anymore. Heat stood up off the asphalt in slow sheets. The route ran straight for 3 kilometers ahead of the lead gun truck, and then bent left behind a low rise, and somewhere past that bend, at a culvert marked on every strip map in the serial, a route clearance team was looking at something that did not belong under the road. 19 trucks, 52 soldiers, roughly 400 tons of cargo the forward base had been promised by nightfall. All of it stopped, all of it waiting, all of it silent except for the idle of diesel engines and the tick of cooling brakes. And down the gravel shoulder, past truck after truck, a woman in contractor khakis was walking. She walked without hurry, the way people walk when the clock belongs to them. Drivers watched her pass in their mirrors. Gunners turned their heads in slow arcs. She carried a green notebook in one hand, closed, and her eyes moved along the line of vehicles like a hand moving down a column of figures. 1 hour earlier, a staff sergeant had thrown her pack off the tailgate of Truck 3. It is worth going back to see how that happened. 0600. The staging yard was gravel and floodlight and diesel exhaust, a rectangle of packed stone the size of 2 football fields on the edge of a logistics hub that never fully slept. 19 trucks stood in a column of 2 rows, mirrors folded in, cargo strapped and sealed. The morning heat had not arrived yet. The dust had. "Go fetch, little lady." The pack was already in the air when he said it. It arced off the tailgate of Truck 3, 12 kilograms of assault pack turning once, and hit the gravel with a flat crunch that carried across the yard. Small stones skittered. A water bottle inside made one dull knock. Staff Sergeant Judd Ferris stood on the tailgate, with his hands coming back to his hips. He was 33 years old, built like the job, and he ran the sharpest serial in the battalion, and knew it. He was not smiling. This was not a joke to him. That was the thing about Ferris that made the yard go quiet, the certainty. He looked down at the woman standing beside Truck 3, the way a man looks at a scheduling error. "Manifest says 19 trucks," he said. "Not 19 trucks and a tourist." The yard had stopped. 20 meters away, a specialist named Yusuf Okafor, 21 years old, driver of Truck 3, took half a step toward the pack, because that is what decent people do. Ferris moved nothing but his eyes. Okafor stopped, as if he had walked into glass. The woman crossed the gravel and picked the pack up herself. She was in her 40s, dark hair pulled back tight, khaki field trousers, and a tan blouse with no rank on it anywhere, and the laminated badge clipped to her pocket read, M. Halverson, Mobility Field Representative. She beat the dust off the pack once, against her thigh, and did not look at Ferris at all. She looked at the truck, then at the interval to the next truck, then at the gate. First Lieutenant Brady Nichols came around the front of the command truck with a clipboard and 24 years of being alive, most of which was not helping him now. Halverson held out a single sheet of paper, the movement order, folded to the passenger annex. One line was flagged. Monsieur Halverson, Mobility Field Representative, Authorized Rider, Nichols read. He looked at Ferris. Ferris looked back at him with an expression that had won every one of these exchanges for 6 years. "She's on the order, Sergeant." "Paper says a lot of things, Lieutenant." Ferris dropped off the tailgate and landed heavy. "My serial says what actually rolls." But the line item stood, because even Ferris did not strike lines off a movement order in front of witnesses. Not yet. Halverson shouldered the pack, walked 6 vehicles down, and climbed into the cab of Truck 7 without being invited or told not to. The yard restarted around her, the way a room restarts after a dropped glass. Too quickly, too loudly, everyone very interested in straps and tire pressure. It should be said plainly, because it matters to everything that follows. Ferris was not a bad truckmaster. He was, by the measurable numbers, the best one the battalion had. 6 years running serials, an on-time rate the operations shop quoted at briefings, not one vehicle lost to a preventable fault in his tenure. Certainty like his is not built from nothing. It is built from being right, over and over, about everything except the one thing coming for him that morning. Inside the cab, she did one small thing that nobody was supposed to notice. The truck carried a 5-point restraint, the kind that takes new riders a minute and a half and 2 wrong buckles to figure out. Halverson rigged it in 4 seconds. Both hands, no looking, the shoulder straps seated, and the cam pulled tight in one motion, like a person closing a door in her own house. Sergeant First Class Antonia Reyes, 41, lead gun truck commander, 11 years of roots behind her, was passing the door of her vehicle when she saw it. She stopped for a quarter of a second. Then she kept walking and said nothing, because Reyes had learned a long time ago that the things worth noticing are worth noticing quietly. At the command truck, Ferris leaned into Nichols and lowered his voice to the register he used for decisions he had already made. "Before we SP, I want her kit against the manifest." Across the yard, in the cab of Truck 7, the woman opened a green notebook on her knee. It was already half full. The commander's brief stepped off at 0605 at the hood of the lead gun truck, and it was, by the numbers, a good brief. Nichols ran it off a card. 19 vehicles in order of march, 100 meters of interval on the open road, 40 kilometers per hour through the built-up stretch, halts at named checkpoints, actions on contact, actions on breakdown, actions on indirect fire. The driver stood in a horseshoe with coffee going cold in paper cups. Ferris stood at Nichols' shoulder, like a wall standing behind a fence. Halverson stood at the back with the notebook. She wrote in it the whole way through, small exact lines. 19 vehicles, 100 meters, 40 kilometers per hour. She wrote the numbers the brief said, and beside 2 of them, she made a second mark, and what the second mark meant was not available to anyone standing near her. At 0610, Truck 3 broke. The air pressure warning came on and stayed on, and the gauge sagged, and the brakes on the rear axle dragged just enough to smell. 2 mechanics had the side panel open in 90 seconds and began the argument that mechanics begin, one blaming the compressor, one blaming the governor, both of them half shouting over the idle. The serial's on-time departure began to bleed out on the gravel. Okafor stood by the bumper of his own broken truck, useless the way drivers are when mechanics arrive, and Halverson came past him with her pack already squared away, and stopped, and said, at a volume built for one person, "Glad hand seal. Rear coupling. It's cracked. You're bleeding air at the connection, not the compressor." Okafor looked at her. She was already walking away. He crouched at the rear coupling, put his thumb on the rubber seal of the glad hand fitting, and felt the hiss go soft under the pressure of his thumb. The seal had a split in it the width of a hair. The fix took 90 seconds and a $2 part. The gauge came up. The warning light went out. The mechanics closed the panel and moved the argument on to whose fault it had almost been, and Okafor stood there, looking down the column at a woman in contractor khakis who was not looking back. Reyes saw that too. She was watching more carefully now, the way a person watches when the first data point will not sit still. At 0612, she watched Halverson brace her strip map against her knee at the hood of Truck 7, and she watched the woman's finger move down the route, and she saw what the finger did. It did not trace the road. It stopped. It stopped at every culvert symbol, every wadi crossing, every choke point where the road narrowed between walls. Stopped, held for a half second, moved on. In order. like a priest touching stations. Drivers read roads. What this woman was reading was underneath the road. Reyes drifted over with her helmet under one arm and put it as flat as it could be put. "You ridden this route before?" Halverson folded the map along its creases. "Exact. Once or twice." 2 syllables and the morning between them. Reyes nodded slowly and walked back to her gun truck and did not laugh at anything for the rest of the staging. At 0614, the lead gun truck rolled through the gate on time after all, and 18 trucks followed it at 100 meters of interval, and the serial went out into the flat morning light with its cargo and its 52 soldiers and its 1 passenger. On the internal net, low and amused, the truckmaster's voice, "Everybody keep an eye on the tourist in 7. Laughter crackled through 19 cabs. In the cab of Truck 7, the tourist looked at her watch and wrote down the time. The joke got better mileage than the trucks did. For the first 20 minutes of the route, the internal net kept finding new angles on it. Whether the tourist had brought sunscreen, whether the tourist would need a rest stop, what the tourist's company charged the army for a ride-along nobody wanted. It was Ferris's serial, so it was Ferris's joke, and laughter on a convoy net follows rank the way water follows grade. Okafor did not laugh. Twice the net went to him by name, feeding him a setup, and twice he keyed the handset and said only, "Copy." Ferris noticed that too. Truckmasters notice everything. It is the job, turned sideways. At 0625, the serial pulled into its first scheduled halt, a wide gravel apron beside the route with berms on 2 sides, and the drivers dismounted into gun truck shadow, and Ferris walked the line with his clipboard and his certainty. He checked straps. He checked tires. He checked the trucks the way he was checked out to check them, thoroughly, fast, correctly. Whatever else the morning was going to prove about Staff Sergeant Judd Ferris, the man knew trucks. Then he reached Truck 7. "Kit check," he said. "Everything against the manifest. Rider included." The pause on the apron lasted 1 second and did not survive his face. Halverson's pack came down off the cab and onto the tailgate of the nearest truck, and Ferris dumped it. Not roughly, not gently. A man inventorying a problem. Spare socks, water, a tourniquet staged where a professional stages one, in the top flap where a one-handed pull would find it, a rain jacket, and the green notebook. He picked the notebook up and let it fall open where the pen had held it, and he read aloud, because an audience had assembled, and audiences are what certainty eats. Interval 112 meters. He flipped a page. Culvert at grid 4-3. Another page. Halt discipline, 90 seconds late. He looked up and let the pause do its work. "She's writing a diary about culverts, gentlemen." The drivers laughed because the truckmaster was laughing. That is how convoy nets and gravel aprons work. The laughter runs down the order of march, like current down a wire. 19 trucks worth of soldiers heard that a middle-aged contractor was keeping a diary about culverts, and the morning felt lighter for it. Halverson stood beside the tailgate, with her hands loose at her sides, and watched her own possessions with the expression of a woman watching weather she has already planned around. Reyes, up in the turret shade of the lead gun truck, did not laugh. She was looking at the tourniquet, then at the notebook in Ferris's hand, open to a page of intervals and grids, and times recorded to the second. 19 trucks laughed at a green notebook. The notebook had already graded all 19. Ferris dropped it back on the pile. "Pack it up. We roll in 5. She repacked the pack herself, item by item, everything returning to the place it had come from. The tourniquet back in the top flap with the pull tab facing out. It took her 90 seconds, and she did not hurry any of them. One shoulder strap had slithered off the tailgate edge, and Okafor, standing nearest, caught it, and held it up for her. A small thing. Half a second of ordinary decency offered in front of the man who had frozen him with a look at 0600. She took it with a nod that lasted exactly as long as the courtesy had. Ferris saw the exchange from 10 meters and filed it the way he filed everything, and the file was growing a label he did not yet have words for. Nichols came to stand at Ferris's elbow as the drivers mounted up, and got as far as he ever got. "Sergeant, she's on the movement order." "Paper says a lot of things, Lieutenant. My serial says what actually rolls." Ferris clipped his pen to his pocket. "She'll be off it by the next halt. Watch." In the cab of Truck 7, Margaret Halverson clicked her pen once, wrote one more line in the green notebook, and closed it. If you have ever stood in a motor pool or a break room or a briefing and watched a professional get written off by the man who was busy grading himself, if you know what that silence tastes like, subscribe to Honor Tales. The next hour of this route settles the bill, and you are going to want to be here when it does. Ferris did not wait for the next halt. Rolling again at 0631, he went to work with the tool he trusted most after his trucks, the radio. He called movement control on the battalion net, and he did it correctly, because Ferris did everything correctly right up until the moment it mattered. He cited the rider vetting policy by its regulation number. He requested confirmation of the passenger's authorization, and, pending that confirmation, her removal from his serial at the next checkpoint. He used the phrase unvetted rider twice, and the phrase good order and discipline once, and his voice never left the register of a man doing his duty. Movement control took 4 minutes to answer. Reaper 70, line item stands. Rider is authorized under authority MFR 6. I say again, MFR 6. How copy? In the command truck, Ferris looked at the handset, and then at Nichols. "Contractor billing code," he said. "Contractors stamping their own paperwork now. Outstanding." He keyed the net. 70 copies. Strong copy on MFR 6. He said the designator, the way you say a word in a language you have decided not to learn. Then he did the thing that was still inside his lane, because the system had told him no, and Ferris had a lifetime of practice hearing no as a routing instruction. At the checkpoint halt, he reassigned her. Truck 7 was 4th in the order of march, clean air, 2 vehicles behind the lead gun truck. He moved her to the trail truck, 19th of 19, last in line, the dust seat, the seat that eats the powdered wake of 18 vehicles for every kilometer of unpaved route, the farthest seat in the serial from Reyes's guns. "Safety," he said on the net, for the record. Rider repositioned to trail for accountability. The net acknowledged him in 1s and 2s. Then Halverson's voice came up on it for the first time all morning. 4 words, exact radio procedure, timed into the gap between transmissions the way people transmit when the net they learned on had fire on it. 70 rider copies, moving. Silence for a second on 19 radios. In the cab of Truck 12, a driver looked at his gunner, and the gunner looked back. That had not been a tourist's radio voice, and both of them knew it, and neither of them had a place to put what they knew. She walked the length of the serial with her pack on one shoulder, 15 trucks worth of watching, and climbed into the trail truck's cab and thanked its driver, who was 19 and had not spoken to her yet, and now never quite worked out how to start. Through the mirror, he watched her open the green notebook, look at her watch, and write. She wrote down the time. She wrote down the truck number. Some ledgers only look like notebooks. The trail seat is its own education. At 100 meters of interval, the dust of 18 vehicles ahead does not disperse. It stacks, kilometer by kilometer, into a hanging brown corridor that the last truck drives through blind at 40 kilometers per hour. Windows sealed, air vents wheezing grit. It coats the mirrors first, then the windshield wipers arc, then the taste of everything. Soldiers call it the dust seat because soldiers name things honestly. She wrote it without comment, one hand steadying the notebook, and marked the visibility figure, under 50 meters at the worst stretch, because degraded trail visibility on this route was finding its way into a paragraph that did not exist yet. The route unspooled westward. The built-up stretch fell behind them, and for 9 minutes, the serial ran clean at 100 meters and 40 kilometers per hour. 19 trucks drawing one long ribbon of dust across a flat and empty morning. At 0640, the ribbon stopped. The transmission came from far ahead of the lead gun truck, relayed down through battalion, flat and procedural, and instantly wrong in 52 stomachs at once. The route clearance package working ahead of them had flagged a suspected device at the culvert at grid 43. All movement on the route was frozen, effective immediately. Grid 43. The culvert her finger had stopped on at 0605. All Reaper elements, hold in place. Nobody moves. The convoy sat. That is the true texture of it, the part the movies do not keep. 19 trucks in the open, engines idling because restart failures are their own emergency. Gunners scanning arcs that had not changed in an hour. Heat arriving in earnest now, and time going soft. Drivers dismounted in pairs into the shade of the gun trucks. Somebody's radio played one bar of music and was silenced with extreme prejudice. Ferris paced. He had the halt security set inside 4 minutes. Dispersal, arcs, far and near recognition signals. And it was set well. And then there was nothing left for him to be right about. And the pacing began. The arithmetic pacing him was simple. Route frozen. Cargo due by nightfall. And the only other way west was the alternate route through the Wadi system, a route he already suspected they would not get, because 19 loaded line haul trucks are not a patrol, and alternates get approved by cargo class, and his cargo class was the heaviest thing moving in the sector. Battalion confirmed it at 0652, in the dry voice the Army saves for its most immovable objects. Reaper 70, be advised. Alternate route is closed to your cargo class, absent a waiver from the theater mobility commander. Stand by. Then find whoever signs waivers, Ferris said on the net, certainty finally cracking loud enough to hear, and wake him up. The net did not answer him. Nets never answer that voice. Nichols keyed his own handset, requested guidance in the phrasing the schoolhouse had given him, and was told to stand by for tasking, which is the Army's way of saying that the answer exists and outranks you. Reyes climbed down from her gun truck. She walked the line rearward, all 19 trucks of it, past drivers who straightened slightly as she passed, because sergeants first class have that effect at rest. She walked with her helmet on, and her weapon slung, and her eyes doing the automatic arithmetic of dispersal and shade and sectors. And she stopped at the trail truck, at the passenger window, off the net, out of every earshot that mattered. The window was down. The woman inside had the strip map open on her knee. Reyes looked at the map first. That was the thing that finished it for her. The bypass through the Wadi system, the alternate nobody had been granted yet, was already marked on the contractor's map in neat pencil, with 2 culverts on it circled, and interval figures written beside the narrow stretch in a small, exact hand. I've watched you read this route all morning like you paid for it, Reyes said. If you're who I'm starting to think you might be, this serial is about to get very quiet. Halverson looked up from the map. Something moved behind her eyes that was almost warmth, the recognition of one professional by another, passing between them like a coin. Ask me at the culvert, she said. 3 words. Reyes held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once, the nod that seals a thing rather than answers it, and walked back up the line. And when she reached her gun truck, she checked the ammunition on her gun that did not need checking, because her hands wanted something honest to do, while her head rearranged the morning. Behind her, faint on the command net, Battalion came back up. Reaper 70, stand by for tasking. Stay with this. You have watched a radio net spend a whole morning talking about a woman it thought it understood. Subscribe to Honor Tales, because in the next few minutes, you are going to hear that same net find out exactly who it has been talking to. The trail truck's cab was an oven with mirrors, and Margaret Halverson sat in it alone. The 19-year-old driver dismounted into shade 20 meters away, and she opened the green notebook to the page she never showed anyone. It was the first page. It was 15 years old, transplanted from notebook to notebook, the way some soldiers move a photograph and some move a coin. It held one grid reference in fading pencil, written by a 29-year-old captain the night before a movement she had not been allowed to plan. You can delegate a route, she thought. You can't delegate the weight of it. Afghanistan, 2011. She had been Captain Halverson then, 29 years old, commanding a route clearance company through its second rotation in Helmand, a company that swept roads for a living, meter by meter, at walking speed, so that everyone else's trucks could drive them at 40. She had been 5 years into the trade by then, route clearance platoon leader in Iraq at 24, 2006 to 2008, back when the enemy's bombs and the Army's countermeasures were teaching each other new arithmetic every month. She knew culverts the way surgeons know arteries. A culvert is a hole under a road, and a hole under a road is a gift to anyone with patience. And patience was the one thing the enemy never ran short of. The crossing at Grid 22 had not been hers. That was the whole of it, and 15 years had not made it smaller. A higher echelon had cleared it, a different unit sweep, a stack of paperwork, a colonel's initials, and the movement order had come down with the crossing already blessed, and her protest had gone up through the correct channels and come back down with a correct answer. The route is cleared, Captain. Execute. Corporal Mateo Vega was 22 years old, from El Paso, and he drove her lead vehicle like it was a skill the rest of the Army had not discovered yet. He had a wife of 14 months and a daughter he had met on leave exactly once. On the morning of the 11th of March, 2011, at a culvert crossing cleared by somebody else's signature, Vega's vehicle crossed first because it always crossed first. She was 30 meters back when the culvert went. 30 meters is close enough to feel the pressure wave arrive through the seat of a vehicle before the sound does. It is close enough to be out of your own truck while the dust is still standing in the air like a wall, and far enough that there was never anything to be done. And the mathematics of those 30 meters, she had run them 10,000 times, always came out the same. The order of march was the order of march, and he crossed first because he always crossed first, and the only variable that had ever been negotiable was the signature on the clearance, and the signature had not been hers. She wrote the letter to his wife by hand and rewrote it 4 times. She learned in the years after that his daughter kept a photograph of a young man in a vehicle hatch grinning under a desert sky, and that the girl would be 17 now. She did not learn how to make the 30 meters shorter. Nobody does. The Army's language for what followed is short and clean and fits in a report. Hers was not, and did not, and she had spent 15 years converting it into something that could be carried, a rule. The rule had one line. If your name is on the route, your boots go where the trucks go. And she had walked culvert approaches on her own boots on 4 continents since, as a major, as a lieutenant colonel commanding an engineer battalion from 2019 to 2021, and as a colonel, promoted 2025, 43 years old, handed the flag of the theater, route clearance and mobility group, which meant, on paper, that every route in this theater was hers, every sweep schedule, every culvert inspection, every waiver, every cargo class restriction, hers to sign, hers to answer for. 3 near-miss incidents in 5 months had crossed her desk in stapled stacks, and the stacks had told her what stacks always tell: everything and nothing. Paperwork tells you what happened. It is very quiet about why. So she had done the thing her staff hated, and her own commander had signed off with one raised eyebrow, pulled her rank off her collar, put her own name on a movement order annex with the designation MFR 6 beside it, and gone out to ride the routes as nobody. A mobility field representative in contractor khakis, one more line item, invisible. Because a colonel at a staging yard gets a rehearsed serial, a spotless manifest, and coffee. A nobody gets the truth. The truth had thrown her pack in the gravel at 0600. She closed the notebook on her thumb and looked out the windshield at the shimmer where the route bent left toward grid 43, toward a culvert some patient man had judged worth his time, and she felt the morning arranging itself into the shape she knew best. The device ahead was not hers. The stall was not hers. But the route was hers, and the waiver was hers, and the moment was coming down the net to meet her, whether she reached for it or not. The radio on the trail truck's dash crackled with the battalion net, relayed, faint. Reaper 70, confirm your manifest. We show a waiver authority writing your serial. Up at the head of the column, in the command truck, that transmission arrived like a stone through a window. Ferris took the handset off Nichols' map board before the lieutenant's hand had moved. Battalion 70. Say again your last. Our manifest shows 19 trucks, crew, and 1 authorized rider. Contractor. Over. A pause, 4 seconds long, which on a battalion net is a geological age. 70, stand by. Ferris stood holding the handset, and the stall stood around him, and something in the arithmetic of the morning had started moving under his feet, and he could feel it, and could not name it, and the not naming made his voice louder. He put the handset down and made his decision, the one that had been assembling itself in him since 0600, since a movement order had said a thing his yard had not agreed to. This serial is not sitting on a hot route till dark, he announced, to Nichols, to the command truck, to the pieces of the morning still taking his orders. Because movement control lost its spine, and some contractor's paperwork is clogging the net. He pulled the serial log off its clip. The rider is the loose end. I'm cutting it. What he did next, he did in front of witnesses, in his own handwriting. He drew a line through her name on the serial log. M. Halverson, struck through, 1 clean stroke, initialed JF in the margin, timed at 0658. Then he walked the length of the column rearward, with the log still in his hand, and at the trail truck, he pulled her assault pack off the tailgate himself and set it down on the road shoulder. In the dust, 12 kilograms of it, the second time in one morning that a man had put that pack on the ground to make a point. Routes closed, little lady. So is this serial. He said it evenly, a man performing procedure. Maintenance truck will run you back to staging. You'll be somebody else's paperwork by lunch. Behind him, the maintenance truck, the serial's only recovery asset, the vehicle that existed so that a broken truck on a hostile route would never sit alone, was already being waved out of its slot on his order. Sending it back down a frozen route alone, crewed by 2, to solve a problem that fit in a passenger seat. Okafor had been ordered to ride along, and Okafor was looking at Nichols, and Nichols was looking at the serial log with the fresh line through it, and the lieutenant's mouth opened and shaped the beginning of a word, and closed. He would carry that unfinished word for the rest of the morning. It would turn out to matter more than he knew. Halverson looked at her pack in the dust. Then she did the thing that nobody at that halt ever quite forgot, though it would take them another 6 minutes to understand it. She bent, picked the pack up, the same motion as 0600, 1 beat slower, unhurried the way tides are unhurried, checked her watch against the halt log on the trail truck's dash, wrote nothing, and smiled at Staff Sergeant Judd Ferris for the first time all day. She was still smiling when the command truck's speaker, 17 vehicles away, keyed open loud enough to carry down the whole frozen column. Reaper 7-0, this is Warhorse 6. Put Colonel Halverson on the net. Warhorse 6 was the battalion commander himself, Lieutenant Colonel Everett Shaw, and battalion commanders do not personally come up on convoy nets to ask for contractors. The halt went silent, the way water goes still, all at once, from the edges inward. 52 soldiers heard the transmission. 51 of them turned, in one slow ripple of helmets down the length of 19 trucks, to look at the woman standing on the road shoulder with a pack over one shoulder. The 52nd was Ferris, who did not turn for a moment, because his body was still ahead of his understanding. Then the word, Colonel, finished arriving. Confusion first. A contractor, the net had the wrong. His eyes went to the badge on her pocket, M. Halverson, and the movement order annex assembled itself behind his eyes. MFR 6, Mobility Field Representative 6, and the numeral 6 on a designator on this net meant what 6 always means: disbelief second, the physical kind, a small shake of the head, the body voting against the evidence. Then she walked past him toward the command truck, and the drivers near the trucks straightened as she passed without being told to, instinct outrunning information, and Ferris's face did its third thing: recognition. Halverson, Route Clearance and Mobility Group, the signature block at the bottom of every route status, every culvert report, every waiver denial he had ever cursed at a staging yard. The name had been riding his serial since 0600. He had thrown its pack in the gravel. The fourth thing on his face had no performance left in it at all. At the command truck, Halverson set her pack down, gently, this time on the seat, and held out her hand to Nichols, who gave her the handset like a man handing over something he had just discovered was load-bearing. Warhorse 6, Halverson, send it. She did not announce herself as Colonel. She did not need to. The net did it for her in the shape of every transmission that followed. The sudden precision, the dropped half-second of deference before each reply. A battalion staff auditing its own last 3 hours in real time. What followed was 6 minutes of a professional operating inside her own trade, and the 52 soldiers who heard it never described it afterward without slowing down. She took the route clearance team's report directly. Device signature at the 4-3 culvert. Disposition pending. EOD inbound, with an estimate measured in hours. She asked 4 questions in brevity code that stripped the problem to its load-bearing walls. Then she pulled her own strip map, the one with the bypass already penciled, 2 culverts circled, and walked battalion through the alternate route, through the Wadi system, grid by grid, interval by interval, and the net took her dictation. Alternate is approvable for this cargo class under waiver, she said, and the waiver authority is standing on the route. I'll walk the 4-7 culvert myself before I sign it. Give me the RCP lead. And she did walk it. That was the part the drivers talked about longest. The clearance team's security element brought their vehicle up the shoulder, and the woman whose pack had been thrown off a truck at dawn rode forward to the bypass with them, dismounted, and walked the culvert approach at grid 4-7 on her own boots. Head walls, fill line, the seams where disturbed earth tells its quiet stories, reading the ground the way she had read it since she was 24 years old, while a staff sergeant's serial idled behind her in the heat and learned what MFR 6 meant. The route clearance team led, a master sergeant with 2 of these tours behind him, walked the approach at her shoulder and later told his own soldiers what it had been like. She asked for the culvert's inspection history by date before she looked at the culvert itself, and then she looked at the fill slope for a long half-minute and said, The disturbed earth on the east headwall was frost heave repair from the spring, logged in February, and she was right, because she had signed the work order. She checked the drainage line on her stomach with a flashlight. She spent 11 minutes on a piece of road most convoys cross in 4 seconds. Then she stood, beat the dust off her trousers, with the same motion she had used on the pack at dawn, and said the culvert was clean, and the master sergeant, who did not impress easily and had not been told who she was, said afterward that he would have driven his own family over it on her word alone. She came back up on the net at 0721. Warhorse 6, Halverson. 47 culvert is clean. Alternate route is waved open for Reaper 70. This movement only, my authority. Conditions: 150 meters interval through the wadi, 30 kilometers per hour. Gun trucks posted at the narrows until the last vehicle is through. 70 executes on my word. There was no formation. There was no parade ground scene, no massed salute. None of the ceremony the morning's arithmetic might have seemed to owe her. There was only this: Reyes, standing by the command truck door, as Halverson turned back toward it, stepped back, and opened it. One economical motion, the courtesy of one professional to another, worth more than 100 salutes from men who had been laughing an hour before. And Nichols. The lieutenant came to attention beside the hood and rendered one salute, quiet and exact, owning with his hand what he had not owned with his voice. She returned it once, the way it was given. Then she looked at Ferris. He was standing beside the serial log clipboard, and the log was still in his hand, and on it, in his handwriting, timed and initialed, was a line struck through the name the entire battalion net was now answering to. "Get your trucks ready to roll, Staff Sergeant," Colonel Halverson said. "You're driving mine." The convoy crossed the wadi system at her interval, and her speed, 19 trucks at 150 meters through the narrows, with Reyes's gun trucks posted at the choke points, and the delay that had been running toward hours closed out at 41 minutes, and the morning's arithmetic finished the only way it was ever going to finish. The convoy rolled because she said it could. Ferris drove. She rode in his cab, in the passenger seat of his own truck, with the green notebook open on her knee. And for 110 kilometers, the Consequence sat next to him at reading distance and turned pages. He started 3 sentences in those 2 hours. "Ma'am, I..." made it out twice. "This morning..." made it out once. None of them found a second half, and she did not help. And the silence that followed each one was not cruelty. It was accuracy. She let the route do the talking. Every culvert they crossed on the alternate she had signed open, every interval the serial now held to the meter, and Staff Sergeant Judd Ferris, who knew trucks, drove the best 110 kilometers of his career, with his certainty riding in the back where the pack should have been. At the forward base, under floodlights coming on against the dusk, the cargo crossed its final checkpoint at 1840, inside the promise after all, and the serial broke down into fuel lines and wash points and the loud relief of soldiers whose day had decided to end well. Halverson wrote the assessment at a plywood table outside the movement control office, by hand, on the forms her own group had designed. It ran 4 pages. It credited the serial's halt discipline and dispersal by name. It credited the drivers of trucks, 3 and 12. It credited Sergeant First Class Antonia Reyes's lead gun truck in one sentence that Reyes would never see, but that would follow her file for years. And it recorded the glad hand seal, the intervals, the radio procedure, all 112 meters of it, in the small, exact hand of the green notebook. The lost hour it attributed in one clean sentence, without adjectives, to a truckmaster who had confused authority with ownership. That was all. There was no arrest, because nothing that morning was a crime. There was no court-martial, no inspector general, no cuffs at a formation. There was a staff sergeant retained, retrained, and reassigned to run his next 3 serials under the supervision of the lead gun truck commander he should have been listening to all along. Soldiers who heard about it later, expecting a firing squad, always went quiet at the actual ending, because the actual ending was worse and better at once. He kept the job, and the job now knew exactly who he was. Ferris's next convoy brief 3 weeks later opened with the truckmaster reading every name on the passenger annex aloud, and nobody in that briefing knew why, and he never told them. Reyes came by the plywood table once, at the fuel point's far edge, on an errand that did not exist. She stood for a moment in the floodlight spill with her helmet under her arm, and asked the question she had banked at the trail truck window. Not the one about who Halverson was, because the net had answered that, but the real one. The culvert at 4-3. You marked it at 0605, before any of this. I marked 11 of them, Halverson said. 4-3 was third on my list. She turned a page. Your list had it too, Sergeant First Class. I watched your gunner's sector change at the bend. Reyes considered that, nodded once, the same nod, the one that seals rather than answers, and walked back into the dark, and the two of them never spoke again, and never needed to. Nichols found her at the plywood table before she finished, and stood at the edge of the light, and owned it out loud this time, all the way to the end of the sentence. I watched it happen, ma'am, at 0600, and again at the halt. I signed nothing, and I said less. Halverson set down the pen and looked at the lieutenant for a moment. 24 years old, 1 route older than he had been at dawn. You were also the only soldier on this serial who asked me a question all morning, she said. You read the movement order out loud, and let it stand when your truckmaster wanted it gone. That was the floor, Lieutenant. Next time, hold the ceiling. She signed the last page. The question is the job. The manifest is just where you write down the answer. He would command his own company someday, and a battalion after that. And he would be known in both for one habit that puzzled his staff. He asked every unfamiliar name on every manifest one question, personally, before anything rolled. Stories like this one end quietly on this channel, and if this ending earned your evening, subscribe to Honor Tales. The quiet ones are the reason the channel exists. The coda is small because she would have wanted it small. 20-30 hours. The forward base settling into its generators, and floodlight night. Margaret Halverson, Colonel, Commander, 44 years old, 15 years of culverts behind her, and 1 green notebook heavier than it had been at dawn, signed the movement closure, shouldered the same assault pack with the staging yard dust still in its seams, and walked alone out of the light toward the next yard, where another serial was forming up in the dark, and nobody knew her name. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.